Everybody, welcome to the next section of our class where we're going to be talking about the trans-Saharan trade. We're actually going to be focusing on a couple of trade routes. In fact, let's go ahead and look at what the next 3 days of our class are going to look like. All right, we're going to be looking at the major trade routes of the medieval era, and here they are. You need to know these both for my comprehension question today, comprehension questions, I should say, as well as the test, that's coming up on these, as well as the medieval era. Our focus is going to be on trade goods, on the spread of culture along these three trade routes, which are the trans-Saharan trade, the Silk Road trade route, and the Indian Ocean. Those are going to be our big three. We're basically going to spend the next 3 lessons not really talking about Europe, so just kind of rub that away from your mind. That trips a lot of people up because, like I've told you before and will continue telling you, a lot of you guys have been taught a very Eurocentric version of history. We're kind of trying to break that. So we're going to spend some time outside of Europe. We're going to spend a while outside of Europe. Our next unit, we're going to be looking at African nations and Native American nations, and may take a trip to Japan as well alongside that. So we're going to be focusing on places that aren't familiar to you, but that's all right because they pay me to familiarize you with them. So let's move on and talk about today's lesson, the Trans-Saharan trade. Okay. Trade is always linked to geography, and in Africa, it's really linked to geography, especially in this West African trade. North Africa is more or less Mediterranean. We've seen North Africa in here a couple of times. Obviously, Egypt, one of the first civilizations, is in North Africa. We've talked about the Romans operating in North Africa. The Greeks had colonies in North Africa. So did a civilization that we barely mentioned, the Carthaginians. Last time we talked about North Africa, we saw it in the Islamic Golden Age. North Africa is associated very heavily with the Mediterranean. Religiously, linguistically, culturally, it's a lot more closely tied to the Middle East and Europe than the rest of Africa. And what North Africa's goods, the trade goods that North Africa produces, are the finished goods of settled society. Glass, wine, olive oil, that sort of stuff. Central Africa and Southern Africa, especially Central Africa here, and when I say Southern, I actually mean I hesitate to call it Southwestern, but it's technically West Africa. Those regions contain trade or crops for trade, as well as, and the big one, gold. That is your major trade good of West Africa. Between those two locations is the Sahara Desert, which has really valuable stuff. But is also really dangerous to cross. Like, you can find mineral deposits in the Sahara that are worth a fortune, but the Sahara is really dangerous. It will kill you dead if you try to cross it without being extremely prepared. And I mean that like in modern times. A migrant caravan, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, several of their vehicles broke down in the desert and a whole lot of people died because the Sahara is extremely hot and extremely dry. Check this out. We don't often appreciate the size of the Sahara Desert, but it is almost the size of the continental United States. Like, as you can see here, this stretch right where I'm drawing this line, that right there is in fact a stretch of desert that would run from the US-Canada border all the way down to the US-Mexico border. That is a lot of desert. And so we need something that will enable us to cross it. Enter the camel. Trade across the Sahara does not happen without the camel. It just doesn't. That is a statement of fact. I feel very comfortable saying that. Without the camel, arriving in Africa, which of course it was introduced by humans, specifically by pre-Islamic Arab traders in the 300s. They brought the camel to Africa, and the camel, look, camels are they are underappreciated creatures. Yes, I am about to go standing a camel. Shush, it's my history class. Camels can survive for so long without water or food that they're about the only creature that could make this journey. And conveniently, they can also carry a lot of stuff. So, camels make the journey across the desert a survivable one. They are going to enable consistent trade. They're going to wind up spreading Islam, as we'll see. But keep in mind, crossing the desert is still really, really dangerous. You still have to be crazy prepared and know the route you're going to take. Normally here I'll show a video clip of the story of Ibn Battuta and his crossing of the desert. Don't have time to do that today, plus watching a YouTube video inside of a YouTube video would be too weird even for me. But if you want that link, let me know. I'll send it to you. All right. The Sahara becomes a major trade route. Not going to bore you too much with the intricacies of camel caravans, but just suffice to say that the Sahara is now crossable, and as people cross it, they discover, West Africa discovers, man, there's a lot of really great stuff coming from North Africa and the Mediterranean. And North Africa and the Mediterranean region go, oh my gosh, these guys have so much gold, we got to get a piece of that. And it becomes a real major exchange route. West Africa is going to trade, yes, all the stuff on that list, ivory, cola nuts, not a huge amount of slaves, but a notable amount of slaves, which we will talk about and actually discuss more in future lessons, future really depressing lessons. But the most notable one, most notable trade good of West Africa, and this is something that's in your questions again today, the most notable trade good of West Africa in this era is gold. Gold is what brings the people to this region. It's where it's where and how the richest man in the world is going to become the richest man in the world of this era. Northerners would bring down manufactured goods and, most importantly, salt. A lot of times this trade is actually called the salt for gold trade, and those are the two most important trade goods. Salt from North Africa would be traded for gold from West Africa. And if you're thinking, that does not seem like a fair trade at all, remember a couple of things. One, gold is pretty, but it's not super useful. So like in West Africa, gold was not the most common method of exchange. It was used for decoration, not for money. Salt, meanwhile, you need to stay alive. You have to have some sodium so your body can retain some water. And in the Niger River, there's no naturally occurring salt. So you gotta have some salt, otherwise the miners can only stay down there for so long. And that is why salt for gold is not as bad of a trade as you would think it is. But key thing here, once again, West Africa's most important trade good is gold. Northerners are bringing down salt. Those are the two big things. What this trade does is it enables the establishment of strong states throughout West Africa. Rulers will tax merchants, tax revenue will then be used to improve the government, improve the military, and those improvements would be used to take over neighboring states. So that is how trade leads to empire. Rulers tax the merchants, taxes get spent on government and bureaucracy and military, and then that is used to conquer your neighbors. Um, Trans-Saharan trade also brings learning. The city of Timbuktu, yes, it's a funny name, but the city of Timbuktu becomes not only a trade hub, but also a center of learning. Um, and Timbuktu, by the way, is the important city that you're being asked about today. The Society of the Mali Empire has a pretty good sized number of literate people. And indeed, a lot of individuals even memorize the Quran. Now, with that said, we're going to see that the form of Islam practiced in West Africa was what's called a syncretic religion, kind of a blending of traditional West African religion and Islam. But we'll talk about that when we get to the Mali Empire itself in our next unit. For now, what you need to know is Timbuktu becomes a learning center as well as a trade center and has a decent sized number of literate people. For example, on the left here, we actually have a university in Timbuktu. Which is pretty impressive, and it's been open for several hundred years. Over here, you can see where Timbuktu is. I have circled it in red now, and you can see it is at the center of this really massive trade hub, swapping gold for salt. Okay, the Trans-Saharan trade goes into decline in the 1400s for two reasons. One is Europeans begin to establish trade ports on the coast, and overseas trade is just better than land trade. It's cheaper, it's safer, it's faster, it's pretty much superior in every way. We'll actually see that again when we talk about the Indian Ocean later on. This is coupled with the North African states entering a period of infighting and decline, and that makes the desert route harder to sell. It's a hard sell to cross a desert to risk your life and really not know what you're going to be stepping into on the other side. And in the late 1500s, West Africa's biggest states, the Mali and Songhai empires, begin to collapse. They begin to go into a sharp decline, and the Trans-Saharan route becomes a much less used trade route. Now, this is, of course, not the end of West Africa's linkages to the outside world. Not at all. We'll see how they are still linked to the outside world a couple of units from now. But for now, what you need to know is that by the late 1500s, the Trans-Saharan trade route was pretty well in decline, and it's never going to become as active of a trade route as it was back then. Thank you guys for listening. Hopefully y'all not only learned something, but enjoyed a little bit of this, and I will see you all on Monday. Take care of yourselves. Bye.